Okay, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. We will be recording today's session as we usually do, so if you need to go back over anything at a later point, you'll have that recording to go back to, and we'll have the data files and completed workflows available for you as well for comparison. Today our session is not just numbers, working with strings in Alteryx. My name is Nathan Flugel and I'll be leading the session today. As you know, if you've been to these sessions before, you guys are on mute at the moment, but certainly if you have questions, you can send those questions in either using the Q&A function or the chat function, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go and do my best to answer your questions, particularly if they're on topic with what we're covering today. We'll probably have a little bit of time at the end for just general questions too. If you have something that's off topic, I'll do my best to answer that as well. So when we talk about strings, we're talking about text fields, things that are alpha and numeric as opposed to just numeric or just date fields. And normally we think of text as something that we don't necessarily do formulas with, but this is really focused on different things that you do related to formulas that are focused on text. Hopefully some of this will be review for you if you've been working with the product, but I'm hoping we'll point out a few things that you may not have worked with or may not have thought of before. I've got a few different exercises we'll walk through, and if you've accessed the data files that I sent out to you earlier, hopefully you'll be able to follow along. If for some reason you've had trouble accessing those files, we'll have them staged, as I said, along with the recording, so you can access them later and follow along with those then if you can't now. So the first section is going to be where we're going to talk about a few things that I think tend to get overlooked, specifically dealing with word and letter positions, word and letter lengths, and then how to get specific characters in specific words. There's some real power there that we don't tend to think of very often, and that's what we're going to focus on trying to make more available to you. And if nothing else, kind of bear in mind what is there so that at some future point, if you need the capability, you'll have that in mind. So first off, we'll talk about working with characters by position. So here we're talking about both word position and letter position. If we talk about words, one of the things that's a little bit hard for us to get our brains around is the fact that when we talk about position, position always starts with the number 0 in this context. So the 0 position is this first word. The 1 position is the second word, and class, in this case, the third word, has position number 2. That's different than counting them. If we were to do a count, and we'll do that in a minute, we'd have 3 words, 1, 2, 3, but position starts with 0. And as we do some of these exercises, you'll see why that's important to bear in mind. When we deal with letter position, again, we'll start with 0, and spaces are counted. So in this case, we have 15 characters here, starting, well, 16 characters, but starting with 0, running up to 15. And again, that'll be important if we're going to call out one of these items, then we need to be able to know what position it is. So if we wanted to get the letter C here in welcome, we'd call out position 3, even though that's the 4th character in the field. So if we want to find things by position in this context, if we're going to get a word, our field has 4 words in it, data blending with Alteryx. If we say get word for this field and pick the word at position 3, we'll get Alteryx. Again, the 4th word, but considered 3 in terms of position. If we said get word position with 0 instead of a 3 there for position 0, we'd get data. Generally speaking, getting the first word is fairly straightforward, other than the fact that I need to remember that I want the 0 position. But but often getting that last word is the hard part because we have to know how many words we have in order to specify which word we want out of a particular field. And we'll see an example of that in one of our exercises here. So that's picking out a word. The second example, the second bullet here, is finding a character, or finding the position of a character. This is saying, find a string within this field. What is the position of string L? So where is the first spot where we get a letter L? In this case, position for the letter L is 6. Again, the 7th character in the field, but that's but it's considered position 6 in terms of how this works out. Hopefully that makes some sense to everybody. We'll try to reinforce it here with our exercise in a moment. Looking at length is more straightforward in what we'd expect. If we look at word length, so let me go back to that. If we look at word length, in my welcome to class example, I have 3 words, 16 characters. The first word is one that we would say is position 0, but it's word 1 in terms of the count. So if I look at this, I can use the left function, which says get me some number of characters from the left of the field. In this case, I could say I want the first 4 characters from the left of this field, and that's going to give me DATA, data. Now, as it happens, that's also the first word, but I haven't asked for it by word. I've asked for it by number of characters. If I say right, again, a similar function, I'm getting a number of characters starting at the right side of the field. Right for this field, number 2 is going to give me the X and then the Y. Again, we're starting the count of characters we're pulling from the far right, so I get the X first and then the Y, and if I kept going, R, E, T, etc. If I look at the length for this field, I'm going to get 26 characters. Again, position would be 1 spot off of number of characters, but I get 26 characters. Data blending with Alteryx. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me just check our Q&A here to make sure we don't have anything waiting. I did see a question. One person was indicating they had trouble hearing. I haven't had anybody else indicate they had trouble hearing. Hopefully that's something that you were able to resolve. Okay. Looks like we're good, including that original person. Thank you. Okay, so I'll keep going. If you guys have further questions, let me know. Again, you'll be able to go back over this later on in the recording if you need to, so hopefully that will make some sense. Okay, so the first exercise we're going to do is using a file that has a set of data in it where there's a field called image that has a color and a number. And what we want to do is separate the color and the number from one another into separate fields, a color field and a number field. Makes some sense. So we're going to do this, potentially we could do this in several ways, but we're definitely going to use some of what we just talked about in terms of position and number of characters and that sort of thing. So let me bring up a new designer window. And you're welcome to play along at home if you have the file. Again, our data file here is shirt-data.yxmd, which should have been one of the files that was in that Dropbox link that I sent out earlier this morning. All right, so let me go ahead and bring in my input data. going to point to shirt-data. Here's the file that I have. It has two fields in it. For our purpose, we're really only concerned about this first field. So there's two things that we want to get out of it. We want to get the number, which hopefully is pretty straightforward, and you can see how we're going to do that. And then we need to get the color. And the challenge with the color is that it's not a specific number of characters. It could be 4 characters, it could be 6 characters, it could be 5 characters, depending on the field. So the first thing we're going to do is grab the color. So for all these examples, we're really working with the formula field. I'm going to add a formula. I'm going to create a field. So I'm typing in the name for a field, in this case, color. And I'll go with what I think of as the simplest way to grab the color in this case, which is to go to the string functions, under functions here, and choose write. So this was one of the functions we saw in my example slides. I'm going to go ahead and double click on that to move it down into my expression window. Now, if you look at the red text at the bottom, it's telling me that it has an unknown variable string. What that means is we need to replace the word string with whatever we actually intend to be evaluating. In this case, we're going to replace string with the name of the field that we need to check, which is image. So I've left string still highlighted. I'm going to double click on image. And now at the bottom it says unknown variable len. Len in this case stands for length. All I really need to do here is indicate how many characters do I want from the right of the field. Since we know the number in this case is just a single character, I'm going to say I want right of the image field 1 character. And to test to make sure that this is working, I'm going to go ahead and run this workflow. So I made a mistake here, or at least I have something I need to correct, which is I told it I wanted this to be a double field, which is just what it defaulted to, which indicates a number. Although it is a number, it's really a string for our purposes, so I'm going to change it from a double to a V string. And I know it's only 1 character long, so I'm just going to change it to a 1 for size. I guess I really could make it a string. It's not going to be a variable length, but at any rate, I'm changing it to a string field, and that should allow it to be happier. All right. Good deal. So we have our color, and we look at our results here. I'll bring it up so it's easier to look at. So here's our record numbers, our original image field, the date field, which again we're ignoring, and the color field, which has the numbers that we've pulled out. So far, so good. Anybody questions on what we've got so far, or anything they've run into there that I can help to resolve potentially? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so to get the rest of this field, I did have a question regarding the difference between the string types. Yeah, so let me come back and talk about the string types now. Here's as good a point as any. So there's really 3 string types. Well, okay, there's technically 4 here, I guess. So string, all of these can contain alphanumeric, any normal characters that you think of. So in that sense, they're all the same. A string field has a specified size and always takes that specified size in terms of how much database space it's going to take and how much file space it's going to take. So if you specify a string field and say it has a size of 10, it will always take 10 characters worth of space regardless of what the content of that field is. On the other hand, if you choose vstring, which is normally what it would default to and what I'd recommend, if you say a vstring has 10 characters, it's going to allow you to use up to 10 characters, but if you only have 3 characters, it's going to effectively use 3 characters worth of space, give or take. It's got a little bit of overhead, so the fact that it has a variable length means it takes a little bit more space than it actually uses, but in effect, if you have a field that has a variable length, then using the vstring is going to be more efficient, particularly if we're talking about large data sets, than using a string. In general, you probably wouldn't use string that often unless you know that you have a field that has a fixed length, is expected to always be that length, then it's more efficient than the alternative. Okay. So that's string and vstring. Generally speaking, those are probably the two that you'll use. The W that shows up as W string or VW string stands for wide, or I think of it as world, but it's for cases where you have a field that has wide characters, specifically the international character set. So if you're using fonts that might be associated with Japanese or Chinese strings, then you'd need W string or VW string in order to account for that, because those characters take more space to store than the traditional Western character sets do. Hopefully that helped. In general, stick with vstring if you don't know any better. If you set a length that you think is long enough for all of your sets, it'll use as much of that as it needs to in the database based on what's ever in a particular field. If you know you have a particular field that has a known length, as in this case, there's just one, then string makes sense potentially. The likeliest case that I've run across is zip code. If you know if you have 5-digit zip, you know it's always supposed to be 5 digits. That's exactly how much it's going to take. That would be a reasonable case to use it as just a string. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. If anybody needs more clarification, I can come back to it. We've probably talked through this in general terms in our sessions focused on data types or field types, but that's everything you need to know in terms of strings, which is fairly straightforward. Okay. So the other part of this exercise that we want to carry out is that we want to get the rest of the field. If I look at this, we've pulled off the last character, but we want everything except the last character. Now, if it were predictable, if all we wanted was the word blue and we knew it was always 4 characters, we could do a left of 4 characters. But as I said earlier, the amount of characters we need to get varies. So because that's the case, we need to determine what is the actual length of a field, of this field on a particular record, so that we can know how many characters to get. Because if you think about it, the number of characters we need to get from the left of this field is the total number of characters minus 1. Because we've already taken care of the number and we don't want that in our color. All right, so to do that, I'm going to create a field called length. It is going to be, I'm going to make it as a double field because it is actually we're going to want it to be a number. Again, we're looking at string functions, and the formula or expression we want is called length. So I found length in my string functions. I double-clicked on it, which moved it down into my expression window. And again, I'm getting this message that says unknown variable string. And I bring this up because when you're using expressions and functions, what it shows you here at the bottom is most often a good clue of where to start if you're not sure what to do next. In this case, we need to replace the word string with the field name that we're checking, in this case, image. So I'm going to double-click on image to replace string. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and run it again. Here's what my results look like. So I've got my color, I've got my length, and I could I could do this a bit more efficiently for those of you who are comfortable with programming and those sorts of things, but I'm going to do this by effectively creating 3 fields. I created my color field, I created my length field so that I have it to use to calculate the color the color. So really this first field should be number. Sorry if that confused anybody. And I'm going to create the color field. So the first field grabbed the number from the right. The second field is calculating the length of the whole field. And then color is going to grab just a piece of it that's the color. So the basic function, the first thing I want to do here is set down a left function, because I'm going to be getting the left characters from my string. So I'm double-clicking on that. Now, the string that I want to get the string that I want to get it from is still my image field. So the basic formula should make sense. I'm getting a number of characters from the left from this image field, and the length of that is the part that we're trying to figure out here. We'll go ahead and, for this, find our new fields, double-click on length, -1. Okay, so again, we're getting a number of characters from the left of the image field. The number of characters we're going to get is the length of the field -1, which means we won't get that, that number character at the end. Go ahead and run that. Oops, and I should make this a v-string, and let's try that again. So the message I was getting was indicating that I was getting a number even though I had calculated it as a number field even though it was a string. So if I look at it here, I'm gonna add a select tool and remove that length field because I don't need it anymore. I was just using it for calculation. I'm also going to take out the date field because it's irrelevant for our current example. So here's our original image field. Here's the number that I pulled out. Here's the color that we pulled out, and we're good. Okay, just checking on our Q&A and chat. There was a question from somebody, is there a function to reverse the string and the extract starting from the second character and the reverse back? So blue 1 would be 1 EULB, remove the EULB and then reverse it to blue. Would it be possible? Yeah, that should be possible. Let's take a look at our functions. There is a reverse string function, so yes, I think you could do it. And the way that I grab the characters here is probably not, well, it's definitely not the only way to do it. I'm not even sure it's the most efficient way to do it. But I wanted to show off how you could use the length as a way to calculate what you need in this case. It's a fairly logical way to get at what you want. But yeah, there's a number of string functions. Most of the functions that we're thinking of in this context will be under this string section in functions, and reverse string is one of those. So that's a good question. All right. If you have other questions on this example, feel free to drop them into chat or Q&A, and I'll do my best to come back to them as we go here. I'm going to take us back over to our slide deck. So we accomplished what we wanted here. All right, the next thing we're going to do is work on getting some text out of a field, in this case the first initial from a field, and add in a period and a space. So it seems pretty straightforward. Let me bring back up my my workflow here. We'll create a new workflow for this purpose. And all right, so first thing I'm going to do is bring in an input data. Oops. First thing is I'm going to bring in an input data. The file we want in this case is called San-Francisco 2013. So we're going to browse to that file. Oops. All right, so there's our San Francisco 2013 file. And that should be in the shared folder I sent via Dropbox, although I realized right before we started that I hadn't put it in the original folder, so you may need to go back out to grab it. I had put one of the wrong files out there. So anyway, it's there now. So in this example, there's a couple things we wanted to do. Some of it's unrelated to really our purpose here, but the first thing we're going to do is say we only want to get 10 records to work with. That's mostly just so that we're not looking at a huge data set while we're doing this. There's two ways I can do it. I'll show you both ways. The first way is to use the sample tool. We often use the sample tool when we want to get the top record in a list or the top 10 or top 50 or something like that. In this case, we want the first n records, where n equals 10. If I run that and look at my results, here's 10 results for me to work with. Okay, pretty easy. The alternative would be to take that sample tool out, go back to the original input tool, and set a record limit of 10. That'll accomplish the same thing. It just accomplishes it a little bit faster in that it only brings 10 characters in altogether from the input. I don't have any more data in my data set at that point. There's probably advantages or disadvantages, but we'll stick with that second example just because that's what I did most recently. I'm going to add a select tool here, not because I necessarily need to do so, but because I want to just get rid of fields that are unrelated to what we're doing. And the only field we actually care about in this case is the employee name field. So I chose options, select, deselect all, and then I'm checking the employee name field. And then I'm going to run it. And now I just have that employee name. That's what I'm working with. Okay. Now, as with our other example, I want to bring in the formula tool. I'm going to create a new field called first initial. It's going to be a V-string. 64 characters is probably plenty. And my function for this V-string is going to start with a left under the string functions. The field I want is the employee name field, so I'm going to double-click that. My length is 1. So what that's going to do is just get the first initial of the first name from that field, which is what we want. But we want a little bit more than that, so I'm going to add a plus, and then a quote, period, space, quote. So my output field, first initial, is actually going to have their first initial followed by a period and a space. You'll see why in a little bit, but trust me on that. I'll give you guys a second here to catch up if you're still working on it, and then we'll run it and see what we have. All right, I'm running my job. If I look at my my fields, I now have two fields. I have my original field with their name. I have the first initial of their first name, and then a dot and a space. And the reason that there is a red flag over here is because there's a trailing space. That's one of the things the system automatically looks for and lets us know about. In this case, that's intentional, but if it were not intentional, obviously we could fix that. And we'll look at least one of those ways to do that, I think, before we're wrapped up today. All right, so we're going to come back to this exercise in a minute, but that's the first part of it. Okay, so a little bit more about some of the functions, in this case, functions that deal with words. What is a word in the context of the string functions? A word is a group of letters or numbers that could include a hyphen, but doesn't have anything else. So alpha characters, numeric characters, and the hyphen Anything else like a period, a colon, a space, any other symbol except the hyphen will separate one word from another. A count words function will get how many words there are in a field. And a get word function will get a word by position. Remembering again, as we discussed earlier, that 0 is the first word. So essentially two things we can do with words. We can count how many words a field has, and we can get a word by its position. In either case, we're telling it what field, obviously, to count or to get the word from. So we're going to go back to our previous exercise, and we're going to grab the last word in the field. And the hint for this exercise is the number of words in the field minus 1 is going to give us the actual word position. So we'll talk through that as we go. I had a question come up. I'll come back to that question in a few minutes here. All right, so let me bring back up our workflow. So we are picking up in this existing workflow. Like in the previous example, I'm going to use a placeholder field here. I'm going to get word count, and that's going to be we'll leave it as a double field. Uses the count word function, where the field we're counting is the employee name field. We'll go ahead and run that. If I look over here, I've added a new field, word count. It tells me how many words are in each of these rows in that field. And then we're going to get last name. Now, last name's a bit of a conundrum in these sorts of cases because with hyphenated names and other complexities, you don't really know if the last name is the last word or not, but for our purposes, we're going to grab the last word from each of these. We do want this to be a v-string. The function we want is going to be a string function, get word from the employee name field, where the number of the word is word count minus 1. This is similar to the example we just had where we were trying to find the word by its length. So again, the thing to remember about this is if I use the first record as an example, Gregory P. Sewer, there are 3 words. If I just said I want word 3, I'd get nothing back because in terms of position, the words are 0, Gregory, 1, P, 2, Sewer. So the number of the word in terms of position is actually 2 that I want. So if I take my word count, subtract 1 from it, accounting for the fact that I start at 0, and then ask for its value, that'll give me 2, which is the last word in this case. So what should happen if we've done this correctly is we'll get each of these, in each of these fields, we'll get the last word rather than anything else. So we'll go ahead and run that. And we got that. And if we had longer examples, and there are longer examples further into the database of names in this case, we'd limited ourselves to 10, but there are ones where there are 5 or 6 words in an employee name field, we'd get whatever the last name is. And for our purposes for the exercise, that's what we wanted to do. Okay. Let me go back to the question that came up before I charge forward any further. Is there a function to only bring back numbers or letters? Something like exclude for this string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. and it would bring me anything but numbers, for example. I can't think of a function that is exactly like that. One of the functions that might help you with that would be the regular expression functions. With regular expressions, you can build an expression that will be very specific, where you say, I want to look for characters of a certain type at a specific point in the field. So with regular expressions, I should be able to do that. It's probably beyond what we'll get into today. Regular expressions is really kind of a session in and of itself, but if you wanted to go down that road, that's probably how you do it. And you can do functions like that within the formula. There's also a regular expression tool that has some specific options in it. Someone pointed out that the last example didn't solve for junior. So the only junior case we had in this case was Kelly-Junior. In this case, it gave us what it was supposed to, which is Kelly-Junior is considered all one word. Remembering again that hyphen is part of a word, so it did the right case. I don't have another example in my case, but yeah, you're correct in that if junior is the last word, this isn't going to account for that. But you could build logic that took out the juniors first and then applied this. But there'll be a number of different examples: juniors, seniors, esquire, whatever those other things would be. Certainly, this isn't a perfect example, but the point we wanted to make was that this is going to give us whatever that last word is, and then obviously we can work from there to make further adjustments. All right. This slide actually gets to something that we already did, but I wanted to underline it. When you're writing expressions, you can build sentences or paragraphs of text using these string functions. And we did this by adding the period and space. Remember that any text you're adding that's just plain text has to be enclosed by quotes. But if you said hello in quotes plus the field username, you'd get hello and then whatever is in that username field. So if the username said Nathan, it would say hello, Nathan. I can also pull in other things in this last example. Hello, Nathan, today is, and then get today's date and time. Would return that. The thing I need to remember is if I'm filling in a string field, I might need to convert something if it was either a number or a date into string, which is what this toString option is doing. Okay, but what's worth remembering is if you have a field that you need to fill in your data set, you might be able to fill it in using a formula. You might be able to create the field that you need and fill it in. If you have a single field that's going to have all the same value, it's pretty easy to do. You just create the field name and have an expression that's quote, whatever you want it to say, close quote, and you're done. If it has a variable based on those rows, you can use the variables as we did here with the username field. So we'll do a quick example that utilizes this feature. Not that it's real hard, but there you go. So in this case, we're going to go back to some of our T-shirt data. We can use the same workflow we were working from a little bit ago. Let me bring that back up. There is a separate file, I think, that has the colors and numbers in it, but we've already got the colors and numbers, so we're good there. Let's look at our workflow, just where my results window is here. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to continue to add to my formulas, and I'm going to create a description field. All right, so I'm creating a description field. I want that description field to be a V-string. I think it's actually going to use more than 164 or than 64 characters. So just to be safe, I'm going to call it 200 characters. And in my expression window, high quality organic cotton, space, quote, plus color, plus, quote, T-shirt with the number plus number plus, quote, emblem, period, quote. Okay, so this is going to produce a description field where the basic text is the same. Basic text is the same for all of them, but there's two variables, the color and the number field, and it's going to fill that in for each of them based on the color or number of that field. So I'm going to run it. Oh, it looks like I might have missed an extra space that I needed, but the basic process looks like it's working. So if I go back to my field here, I want to add a space after the word number and a space before the word emblem so that I make sure I'm getting, oops, and I need another space before T-shirt. That should make it look nicer. There we go. So we've created that. Okay, we had a couple of questions come in related to the field type again. So let me clarify. So in this case, I specified my V string as 200 characters. What that means is what I get in the description field will max out at 200 characters. If for some reason I have more than 200 characters, it's going to chop it off after the 200th character, and the rest of it will get dropped off. And I'll see a warning telling me that that's what happened. So it's not as if I won't know that that's the case, but it will do that for any fields that are more than 200 characters. The value of the V string is, if it only needed 60 characters, it's effectively going to only use 60 characters of space for that field. So it's going to use essentially as much as it needs to up to the size that we specified. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Good. All right, I assume if people have questions, we'll see more questions roll in, and hopefully that helped as far as the field type question. All right, I think we're getting into the last section or two here as we approach the end of the hour. Next section I wanted to talk about was removing stray characters and formatting data. It may not even be something we think of as a string expression, but I think of in that context. So this will be easier to show if I show you the workflow. So our goal here is that there is a field that has numbers in it, but the numbers that are in it have $signs and commas, as we commonly will see. Maybe we pulled it from Excel or someplace else where probably we wouldn't have this problem if we pulled it from Excel directly, but if we grabbed it from a report that had the data in it or something like that, we'll sometimes see dirty data in this way. So let me create a new workflow. I'm going to point to the input data file, top 10 inflation adjusted, which I have in my existing path. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. There we go. Okay, so here's the data as it looks before I've done anything, and it's this last field that's in question. So for whatever it's worth, for movies released since 1977, these are the top 10 movies, inflation adjusted, in terms of how much money they made. So adjusted to today's dollars, here's what those movies made. But in this particular case, I pulled this data off of the web, and it had the dollars and commas in it, which means I can't evaluate them as numbers until I clear out the dollars and commas. So there's a couple ways that I can approach this, and I'll try and show you a few examples. Certainly, I could get rid of the dollar in this case by I guess there's several ways that I can do this. So let's start with the formula field, and let's deal with the comma first. So the field I'm dealing with is total box office, and I'm going to continue to modify it in the field in place. In other words, I'm not going to create a new field for this case. I'm going to go to the string functions, and the function I'm going to use initially is replace. The field that I'm doing the replace in is total box office. The target, what I'm looking for is quote, comma, quote. So I'm looking for commas, and what I'm going to replace it with is quote, quote. No space. I'm just removing the commas effectively and replacing them with nothing. So we'll run that first. All right, so if I look at my results window here at the bottom, I still have a dollar sign on it, but my commas have gone away. Pretty straightforward. And now I want to get rid of the dollar sign. So the function I'm going to show you related to the dollar sign is a function called trim. In this case, we're going to use the variation called trim left. There's trim, which trims on both the left and the right. There's trim right, that'll trim on the right, and there's trim left, that'll trim on the left. So if I say trim left, I need to specify what field I'm trimming off of. Again, the total box office field. And what is it I want to trim? In this case, quote, dollar, quote. What this will do is look at the left side of the field for each of these rows and trim as many dollars as it finds on the left side. If there were $10 signs, it would remove them all. In this case, there's only one, but it'll go ahead and trim that off for us. You can use this function to trim spaces. That's the default. If you said just trim left for field total box office, it would trim any spaces it found on the left side, even if you don't specify that. Okay, I've now trimmed that off. I now have valid numerical values here that I can work with and could sort or do filters on numeric filters and the like. I'll show you belatedly the reason that I wanted to do that, and that is if I go in and add a select and change total box office from a V string to a double, meaning from a string field to a numeric field, and run it, I get messages down here saying this isn't a valid number. And of course, it's not a valid number if you think about it, because the dollar and comma aren't considered valid aspects of a number. By definition, those are text characters, therefore string characters, and it has to be a string field. So if I want to make this into a number, which is my goal in this example, I needed to pull out the dollars and commas, and maybe there were other things that were there before I do that. A decimal would be okay. Numbers obviously can have decimal points, but anything else needed to get removed, and that's what I went ahead and did. So if I put my select after my formula, I could change it into a number. But if I look at my results now in this top stream, because those values weren't numbers, it just gave me null values for all those rows, because it dropped the value if it didn't match the current field type, in that case numeric. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. A couple of questions came in. One, is there any way to extract characters from the field? For example, if I had A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, D, E, F, I just wanted to get A, B, C, D, E, F the number's not always in the same place. Again, I think I'd have to think about that a little bit more, but I think you'd be looking at using regular expressions to extract the, to remove the numbers in this case. So certainly it'd be easier to use regular expressions if I know the position of it, but even so, I should be able to express it in a way that I can get the letters and or the numbers out and not the reverse. But yeah, it depends a little bit on the specific case that you're looking for. Another person asked, can you add more than one character in the replace function? Could I replace both dollar and comma at the same time? If you put dollar, comma inside your quotes, in my example, it would be looking for cases where dollar was followed by comma. So it's very literal. I could have more than one replace function. So I could have used the replace function for both of these, but I would still be doing it with each of them being replaced separately because I wanted to replace just single characters rather than sets of characters. And then the last question was that the single quote was necessary before the character I was wanting to replace because it's a special character, or can you use single or double quotes? In these replace and trim examples, I could use single quotes or double quotes. So if I wanted to replace double quotes, I'd put single quotes around it. Or if I wanted to replace a single quote, I'd put double quotes around it, but otherwise they're interchangeable in this example. We just have to put quotes around it to indicate the string that we're searching for or replacing with. All right. I believe that's my last example here. Let me go back and double check. Yeah. So just a reminder, everybody, if you need to find more information about anything that is related to Alteryx Designer, probably the best place for you to start is the Alteryx community. You can go there and see conversations that others have had, ask questions that might get answered by fellow customers who have lots of experience or maybe doing something similar, or by an employee. And I see folks get answers pretty quickly all the time, and lots of times there's answers that I wouldn't have considered, so I think you get some real interesting perspective there. So I'd recommend that as a way to go. We do have a few more sessions coming up here before we get to our Inspire conference at the beginning of June. The next few sessions, creating repeatable reports next week, an Alteryx Essentials or Basics class the week after, XML parsing, and then in database processing. Again, Inspire will be the first week of June in San Diego. If you can be there, there's a huge amount of value there, I think, for everybody who can get there. There's lots of training sessions that I think have great value, and the chance to talk to other customers and our engineers and various folks that you wouldn't otherwise get a chance to talk to most of the year should be great. I will, I guess, stop at this point. I'm going to go back to my very first slide just as a reminder. June 6th through 9th in San Diego. If anybody else has other questions, I'll hang on for a couple more minutes, but effectively we're done with what we have. I will package up the completed exercises that we used today and put the recording as well as the data files out for you to access here within the next day or two. So if you want to go back over it or wanted to share it with a colleague, that should be available to you. And hopefully this was useful. We will send you to a survey and would appreciate your feedback on the session, particularly if there's things we can improve or other topics we should cover for you in the future. All right, everybody. Like I said, I'll hang on another minute or two if there are other questions, but thanks again for coming and for your attention.